we're ready to go.
Okay. Bez Hashem is
I mean, it's only shear by you. It's the only shear by you. Yes,
It's
basically,
only shear by me. Yeah.
it's the last shear halacha l'maisa on Reish Beis.
Okay. Hopefully we have siyata d'shmaya. The Maisa need the schus HaTzibur today because I just landed. I was gone for a day, and all I had with me was a mishabura. So let's see. Hopefully, Bez Hashem, we'll try to get clear. Siman Reish Beis Siv Zayin, the chedushim that you're going to hear were learned in Istanbul. Since the time
What the Rav was doing in Istanbul, in Izmir,
trying to get out.
Oh, I hear. There are many.
Since the Svardish Gedolim, there hasn't been Azefil Torah learned in Istanbul.
Okay, I went to the Knesset. The Rav knows, of course, that Rav Aaron, the used to walk around with a mishabura all the time. That was only safer that he walked around with. On here in his head, he had a Mishras from Aaron. But
I think I'm the only person in planet Earth that was in the Istanbul airport with talis, tefillin, and a mishabura. So
we're happy. We're happy you made it home.
So the Aguda is now this the Aguda in Istanbul. Bez Hashem.
Okay.
So now, let me again. Bez Hashem. First, let's try to be Masada the Sugya. The first question in the Sugya, when you talk about the Sugya of peiros that are or vegetables that are mashed up, that are smashed up, it seems to be that the lashon of the Shulchan Aruch and Reish Beis Siv Zayin is that such a food that's smashed and mashed would require bari priya eitz and the main gimel. And what's the chiddush of that? The chiddush is because maybe you need to see the pri. Kamash Malan, that no, it's still a pri. What does your mother say when you eat? She says, what's the difference? You eat all this together anyways in your stomach, it all gets smashed together anyways. So she's right. And the Shulchan Aruch sheet is, it seems to be, Reish Beis, Siv Zayin, mashed, smashed. Seems to be that the bracha retains its bracha even if it's mashed and smashed. Kum Rama, and he says if it's cooked up and it's mamish nishtana legamre, it's a boire priya eitz. He says yeshaimrim, some say it's a shahakal, and he says since anyways there are those that say it's a shahakal, and you've had a yaitse with a shahakal, so therefore you're supposed to make on it a boire, a shahakal near b'dvaray. As I state, the Mishabura has HaRav. He talks about this like you've seen HaRav and the whole topic, the differences in all the different cases, etc. L'maisa, let's clear a shaila. The shaila would be like this, and we're going to have to discuss today potato kugels, and we're going to have to discuss Pringles and popcorn and maybe even chocolate at this time. Yeah. The shaila is when one would read the simple lashonis of the Shulchan Aruch, the Paiskim, he might come to say, what exactly is it that makes something go from being a boire priya eitz or a boire priya dama? What does it have to undergo in order to become a shakal? So he might say, if it's like I saw in one sefer, he writes, if it's nicker tzurasa or not nicker, do you see that this thing was a potato? Do you see that this thing was an apple? If you see it was an apple, so then it's going, and you still see even after it underwent this smashing and smashing, then it's going to be a boire priya eitz. If you can't see, it's going to be a shakal. And I saw one sefer that's really what he seems to make the whole sugya very simple. You just have to go and see what people can tell. Okay, it might be a little difficult. Some people could tell, some people can't tell. But that's basically the gather. Are you able to tell or you're not able to tell? If you're able to tell that this was a pri and which pri it was, so then on that you'd make a very priya eitz. If you can't tell, so then on that you would make a shakal nibidvar. The problem with this Rabbi is that lefi this, most of what we do, much of what we do, certainly doesn't make sense. Popcorn, is there anybody that could tell that this thing used to be from corn? Yet we make an adama. Potato chips. Chutz from the Pringle shaila about potato chips. Is everybody, I'm borrower that if you take a Martian and show him a potato chip and you put out in front of him a bunch of things and you ask him, where did this come from? And you show him a potato, he's not going to chap. But we know we make on a regular potato chip a very priya dama. So this is a little bit darsheni. What's be'emetz together? The Ramah says a little bit differently than the way the Welt says it over. The Ramah's lashon is yeshayimrim levarech alav shahakol. He says toiv lachish, like we explained. Aval birach by priya eitz yatzak is kein near eker. The Mishabura on this Ramah adds avad kol tsurasai.
Put up the Shulchan Aruch, please. 242.
Mishabura has got members. He seems to say words here that we hold like the Mechaber, Mamoshan Kayim Loy Nishtana. But if it's Ovid called Surasai, the Mishabur brings here the words of Mamoshan Kayim, and the Pais can bring here the words of not just Nikar Tsura. They bring here these words that it's the Mamoshes is Kayim. It seems to be that from the Mishnah Berurah, the Shulchan Aruch, we'll see really from the Sugya, it's Mavur something else. It's not the Pshat that we're trying to figure out here. Does this thing look like a potato? Can we tell that this mush was once a potato? In essence, it's difficult in Svar also. Who cares what people were able to tell and able to see? The Lashon of the Pais can keep saying, Mamoshon Kayim. Is the Mamosh is here? Is the pre here? And Be'emes, if you look in the Sugya of Trima, the Sugya makes a tzushtel to the case of Truma. And by Truma, over there, the Gemara says a lashon of if you did something to the pre, which al yedei this, it's considered you were mafsid the pre. The pre is no longer, you damaged the pre. What does our Sugya have to do with damaging the pre? We're trying to see it was matched up to such an extent that you can't tell that this item used to be an apple, a potato. What does that have to do with if I ruined the pre or not? It's two separate things. Perhaps in HILCHOS Truma, it's called, I ruined the pre, even if I could tell, or I can't tell. What does it have to do one with the other? It sounds like from the Sugya that it's one Sugya, right? Shnei Sugya Echasing. If it's called that the pre is here, like Rashi says, Alma Benilsa Kaima. If the pre is here, then the bracha is still the bar praise. You still have the pre. If you did something to it that is taking away the shame pre, Mamoshin is not Kayim. It's gone, the Mamoshes. So then that takes away the shame pre, and therefore you don't have the bracha of a pre anymore. In other words, it's not going to be dependent if you're able to tell or not able to tell. I need to know, is the mamoshes of the pre still here? And this Abaisa is something that it seems to be, the Sugya makes it tzushtel like the Chazon Ish explains, to Dvash Tamarim. By Dvash Tamarim, does it sad that if it's considered oymid lekach, etc., agam, you certainly can't tell that this is date juice. It's certainly, but the pre is still called here. If that's the ikar function and the ikar purpose is to get the juice, then that's called that the pre is over here. What we're trying to figure out the whole entire time is the kiyum of the pre, is the mamoshes of the pre still here. With this advice, I will see a lot of things are going to fall into place. Ramosha, for example, Ramosha, I think in the Torah of HaRav, I might have written down where it is. One moment, please. Ramosha, this I did not have.
We have it in the Marmakaiman. We have it in
whatever I didn't have on the plane. So that I have to digress for a moment. Ramosha is in the Koibitz, the Torah of HaRav, in Chelik Beis, in page 13. I said to the Olam, it's in Chelik Vav in page 27. In the new volume of Rav Igish Moshe, the most prolific writer after his Petira. Rav Moshe over there discusses cornflakes, and he discusses that since it's changed al yedei heat and pressure, hagam it's changed al yedei heat and pressure, and hagam it's not nikar leinayim. There's not a person in planet Earth that could see a cornflake and know it came from corn. All right, we know the secret because we learn halacha, but what shaykh is corn? Says Rav Moshe, well, if they make the corn by just, taking heat and pressure and whatnot, then the tsura is still here. It's not called nishtana unless, and this is the biggest site, it's not called nishtana unless, number one, it's pulverized. It is turned into a powder. A powder is a different mitzias. A powder is something that you can do things with. You can make a dough out of it. It's a different mitzias. A powder has a whole different taste and a whole different texture. It's considered a powder. That would be not nikar hatsura. Or if you liquefied it. But other than that, and this is so meduyak because the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Reish Ein Siv Daled, which is something we learned last time, says if you cut something into many different pieces, you cut a vegetable into many different pieces, it's still considered a bari pre'adama. Why? I'm sure Abba Isai that I could cut something into tiny, tiny little pieces to the extent that I won't be able to tell what it was. But it's not totally if you're able to tell. It's totally in one thing. Is the cheftza here? Is the pre still here? So if you turned it into a powder is nothing for it you can't tell. It's a different cheftza bichlal. And that's why the Shulchan Aruch was never even dealing. No, you can't cut something into a powder. If you take something and you change the tsura legamre, that's when the bracha changes. And this is the aleph base of the sugya. As aleph base, the arayas is, but because Hasman Katzar Malachim Ruben, my understanding is I only have one shir to give on this topic. So therefore, I'm going to skip the rayas, and that's going to be the side, which the emes It's clear in the sugya like that. That's Yisayid number one. I hope that's clear. If there's any shalos, please ask now. Yisayid number one is that if it's the tsura is kayim, the pre is here, so then the bracha retains. Mashenkein, if you did something to it, which the pre is gone, it's not a word if you could tell or not tell. And that's why what that sefer says is incorrect. It doesn't make a difference if you're able to tell, you're not able to tell. Even if you can't tell bichlal, like the case of the popcorn, like the case of the cornflake. It's all dependent, is the chefza here. Is the chefza here. And the pre here. Now, by say, let's see. For example, I had a shaila, very interesting. Someone called and he asked any question about what about specific cases. That I'm going to hold off on because I'm going to try to get to as many cases as we can get to. Bez Hashem. Like those cases, for example. Akapanim, somebody asked me that his father is an Altaid and they have to make for him baby food, and they make all types of baby food. Usually the shalom baby food is not negay. Only Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld used to make a bracha before he nursed. But most babies are not making brachas on baby food. But here you have an adult, Alta Zayda, and he's making a bracha on baby food. They want to know, is all of his food from here on in going to be a shahakal? That's a shaila. And it's interesting. There would have been a tzad to say maybe taka not. Why? Because the Aruch HaShulchan, for example, over here brings a drisha that says that when we say something has to be nimayach, it means it has to be liquefied. And he says the drisha is correct. Is the drisha is correct? And maybe this case it's not liquefied, it's pulverized, but it's not liquefied. And that's perhaps something that would give us a siba that to make the bracha on this case of a very pre-8 and a very predama, which, it's hard to tell a yid that for the rest of his life, all the food that he's ever going to eat, he's going to have to make on it a shahakal. And more than that, I also saw that in the Pri Megadim, I think it was, one moment, in the Pri Megadim, he says perhaps the only time that we talk about this favilda business is only at Kama, that you did something more than just pulverize it. You put inside other spices, etc. So then that's when it loses its shame. But if it's the actual stain metzias, just it's pulverized, then that would retain the bracha. So now we have two reasons. Over here, it's just the mashed up pumpkin and the mashed up carrots, etc. Number one, it's not liquefied. And number two, it doesn't have additional other things in it. He's not even allowed for his diet to have other things in it. So perhaps one could declare maybe that we didn't lose the bracha. Now, this Rabbi Isai is not correct in the Shitas Mishnah Berurah, and as you know, I only had a Mishnah Berurah today in the Istanbul airport. The Mishnah Berurah's Shita is quite clear. Mishnah Berurah says in Tikot Mem Beis, Rak Favilda She'avad Kol Tzirasai V'Loi Nicker Klau. That's what it is. The gather of the moyach doesn't have to be dafka liquefied. You don't find it in the Mishnah Berurah. And more than that, the Mishnah Berurah talks about he's discussing over there, Mem Dalid, he's discussing over there with the Baal Tanya and the Chayodim discuss something called ingber, that they would grind it up, and the only tzad he has is because maybe it was not the hachi, so that's the only tzad he has, that therefore maybe it retains its bracha. Why it should retain its bracha? Because of the Pri Megadim, we didn't add anything else in. So you see, according to Mishnah Berurah, again, same idea. One Yisai, is the pre-kayim or is it not? What makes a pre-kayim? If it was chopped up, even if you don't recognize it, but the chepz is here, then the bracha is retained. Mashenkein, if it's a powder, if it's pulverized, certainly if it's liquefied also. But Akama, it's not liquefied, but it's something that doesn't have the mamoshis anymore. It doesn't have the pre is not kayim anymore. So then it would still have the bracha of then it would not have the bracha, then it would be a shahakal. Now this is the basic klalim. And let's see. So cornflakes, we already saw. Cornflakes. Sorry? Cornflakes, we already saw. That Ramesha says that it depends what the cornflakes are. Now, you have to know, Rabbi say, that when you see, there's all different words. There's words such as, there's different ways that they use corn. They could take corn and make it into a flour. And that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in America, I think that that's called milled. I'm afraid to get the names wrong, but I think that's called milled. And or corn meal, it's called. And they also have something else called grits. It's two things, grits and cornmeal. Both grits and both cornmeal, my understanding is that they made it into some type of a powder. And that would go into the gather that we just spoke about, that once something is made into a powder, excuse me, no, 1 second. I think grits is when it's cut up. One moment. Yeah, milled and cornmeal and mill. That means that basically it's been totally pulverized.
What's the question? Millet, M-I-L-L-E-T?
M-I-L-L.
Mill, M-I-L-L. Milled corn.
Milled corn, my understanding is to make it into a powder. Is that correct?
Why? So it's made into a powder, right? So.
And grits, when they write grits,
I'm not sure.
I think grits means that it's pieces. And I think that's the chilik. If it's when it's going to say powder, basically the klal is basically based on that. If it's going to be a powder, so then when they put it back together, a zah humpty dumpty, doesn't make a difference. It's going to be a shahakol because it was turned into a powder. We'll see in a minute. The shiloh Pringles, it's a different shiloh. But when they're taking a flour and they're making the cornflakes, they have the different type of cornflakes. A lot of the Heimische cornflakes, for example, are powder. And those are the ones that are more soggy because they're more powdery. Mashenke, my understanding is the regular cornflakes is not like that. It's not a powder. And therefore, for Shteitz of the Brachos, based on these klum, is going to be a Bari Priyadama. That's the easy case, I suppose, of all the cases that we'll discuss. And that's really what I said. The Igros Moshe brings down. That's really the Maisa, what it says in the Igros Moshe. Now,
you can take this down from the screen now. Yeah.
Grits like polenta are made from dried corn that has been stone ground. It has been ground up, Lagamri? Okay, I plead the fifth. Now, I want to mention something very important before we go weiter. I saw that I saw a very interesting thing in the Shevet Levi. At first glance, it seems very, very mistaber. Shevet Levi writes, what if you have a person, he's about to eat an apple, and the apple he's about to eat, he wants to make on it appropriates. In front of him, he has an applesauce or something like that, which is a total applesauce. Not maybe a homemade applesauce where sometimes you have pieces, which we'll see in a minute, the bracha on that, but a total regular store-bought applesauce, which is definitely in the moich legamre. It definitely doesn't have the mamoshes of the pri is no longer kayim at all. It's almost liquefied, as a matter of fact. And in that case, the bracha on the applesauce would certainly be a shahako. That, I think, is the makubal. The applesauce is basically the ones that you buy. I think it's makubal. Those ones are shahako. Maybe the ones in the house, those might be an eighth because there's still a lot left over where the mamoshes is kayim. Okay. I saw the Shevet Levi says something very interesting. The Shevet Levi writes, if you give me one moment, I'll tell you where the Shevet Levi is. Excuse me. The Shevet Levi is in Chelik Yud, maybe Siman Mem Vav. The Shoyl is talking about mamish this case. He's talking about where you have an apple and you have the sauce. So he says you have a big problem because if you can make the bracha on the eights, maybe it patters the sauce. Because we know the applesauce is a shayla if it's an eighth or a shakel. We just make a shakel because we have a suffix. The Shevet Levi says, so what should you do? If you're going to make the bracha on the eights, he says, that's a problem because now maybe a pater. Elamai, you're going to make the bracha on the applesauce, a shakel. That's not geschmack because you have a shalim of an apple and you have a more chashav bracha of a baypri eights. So he says, what you should do is make the bracha on the baypri eights and have das not to pater the applesauce. And then you'll be able to make a bracha on the applesauce. He writes this for a davar pashit. I must tell you that I saw in the Kaf HaChaim, he brings down.
I don't say. So was it? Why can't the first eight pater Why can't the first eight pater the second possible eights?
Because we paskin on applesauce. Let's say it's a case of where it's totally nimayach. So we paskin into shakel. So he says you're getting into a shayla.
But the Ramah says, "Chen." This is what we were struggling. The Ramah says,
yes, I'm going to clarify this. Exactly what you're asking now, I think, is what I'm about to clarify. This Shevet Levi is a tremendous pella. And the emphasis I saw in the Kaf HaChaim, he brings down about Pa'alim and our Siman, not like this. And this is a very big insight in understanding the Sigin. That's why I just want to speak this out. Before I should have said this before I went into the cases. Cornflakes was just a case study of what we spoke about. But this is an important Yisayt, Rabbi Say. It's a Yisayt how to learn what the Ramah is saying over here. When the Ramah says that the bracha that we make on this applesauce is going to be a Bari Pri 8, what does the Ramah mean? The Ramah is very clear. The Ramah says the Iker Shita is, the psak is really on applesauce, you should make a Bari Pri 8. But it's together like a Meyois Toiv, that on applesauce, you make a shahakal. Why? Because there are shitas that hold that on the shahakal, if you would make a Bari Pri 8, you're not Yoitze, those shitas hold, it's Nimoyach Legamre, it's shahakal. So Meyois Toiv, why not make the bracha shahakal and make everyone happy? But if you'd ask the Ramah says, that's why I do it. But says the Ramah, what's the Iker Shita? The Ramah says the Iker Shita is really on this, you're supposed to make a Bari Pri 8. If you look at the Ramah, good. The Ramah says, really, you're supposed to make an 8. Just Meyois Toiv, why not? You make it on a shahakal. But if you'd ask the Ramah, let's say, for example, someone comes to me and he says to me, what? I didn't know there's a difference between cornflakes. Do I have to do tshuva? All the years, I was buying the Heimish brand, the cornflakes, and I see it's a flour and a powder, and I was making on an adama. So telling me he doesn't have to do tshuva. According to the Halakha Ramah, he didn't do anything wrong. All the years, it was Meyois Toiv. You're really supposed to make adama. You're supposed to make a shahakal. Because why not make everyone happy? But if you want to know what's the Ikra Din, you did the Ikra Din. The Ikra Din is that the bracha on these cornflakes are taka adama. We don't do that because why not make everybody happy? Feed this, now you understand that there's a Kaf HaChaim. Kaf HaChaim, the Rav Pa'alim. The Kaf HaChaim, the Rav Pa'alim are basically coming in essence to Chaylik on the Shulchan Aruch. They say that the Shulchan Aruch is a Chiddush. Why does the Shulchan Aruch say that you make a Bari Pri 8, or it's a machlekes? Why shouldn't we say it's a suffix? And why shouldn't they're actually even stronger than the Ramah? The Sfardim hold it's a suffix, and you should vada have to make a shahakal. The Ramah's mashma that the ikr is really you should make an 8, but why not make a shahakal? It's a little bit of a different nusach. Comes along the Kaf HaChaim, he says, however, the best 8s of all, and I saw that Sfardim bring down that this was the manhaga of tzaddikim, is that you should take an apple, make a bracha on the apple, and pot to the applesauce. The exact opposite in the Shevet Levi. They say you should dafka find an apple, make a bracha on the apple, and pot to the applesauce. Now what's this? Mazev al mazel. The Shevet Levi saying, well, HaRav, don't we paskin that the bracha on the applesauce is shahakal? And therefore, Adarabba, if you're making an 8, what are you doing? You're making it worse. That was his whole problem. So he said, make on the 8s, have kavanah just on the apple and not on the applesauce. And the Kaf HaChaim says, no, the opposite. Take an apple, make a bracha on the apple, and with that, pot to the applesauce. The fee, first of all, the Ramah Rabbi Yisai, it's very, very good. What the Ramah is telling you is, and listen closely, Rabbi Yisai, the Ramah is telling you, Bamis, we pass it on the applesauce, it's an 8. But we're concerned. What are we concerned with? We're concerned with bracha levatala. And since we're concerned with bracha levatala, we don't take any chances. So what are you going to do? You have applesauce in front of you. You're going to make it in a Bari Pri 8. It's true we paskin, it is a Bari Pri 8. But when it comes to bracha levatala, even sveikis and sveikis, we go out of our way to make every shita happy because it's lesisa. We're very, very scared. That's when you're dealing with the shaila of a bracha levatala. Comes along the Kaf HaChaim, he says, great. But what if I'm not dealing with the shaila of bracha levatala? When I make the bracha on the apple, I clearly didn't make a bracha levatala. Okay, so now the bracha is on the apple. Now I have das on the applesauce. What do you mean? Maybe the applesauce is shahakal. Yeah, it's true. But what's the issue of eating the applesauce now without a bracha? Let's say in essence, you're eating the applesauce without a bracha. You made a bracha on the apple. The bracha was a Bari Pri 8. And now you're eating the applesauce, let's say, without a bracha. So then that's the isser of nene meri l'mazeh b'loi bracha. That isser is not as chomer to Chazal as the isser bracha levatala. So therefore, now it's gevaldik. Comes a Kaf HaChaim, he says, listen, if you have an apple, make a bracha on the apple. And then it's chal, and that's the ikar shita anyways. And therefore, it's a very Pri 8 and everything is good. We want to make everyone happy. So the feeder Ramah, it's not very simple. The Ramah was only a Meyois Toiv. Once you made the Bari Pri 8 and you had a way to make the Bari Pri 8 and chal the Bari Pri 8. So now, on the applesauce, so what are you being over on if you're making a mistake? Not a bracha levatala, because the bracha was chal on the apple. You're being over on nene me'oy l'mazeh b'loi bracha, which is, in this case, nene me'oy l'mazeh. I'm not being nene me'oy l'mazeh b'loi bracha. The Ma'aseh, we can go with the ikar shita. When is it that the Ramah warned us and tried to get out of the whole issue? When you have in front of you applesauce. So don't take any chances. You're going to wind up making the wrong bracha. And you might be over on bracha levatala. So therefore, it would seem that you should do the opposite of Rabbeinu Agadol L'Shevet Levi. It would seem if you have an apple in front of you, you make the bracha on the apple and you pout to the applesauce. This is very important you say before I get the cases, everybody say. So if anyone wants to ask, please ask now. Ramah, according to Mishnah Berurah, appears to be speaking about applesauce. Okay, that could be. Yeah, but any questions on what I just said? Clear? Zum ersten Mal, zum zweiten Mal, zum dritten Mal. Okay, great. Now we can go, Mitzvah Hashem, to some cases. I see, let's go to, I suppose we'll go first to the world of potatoes, and we'll see how, how stuck we get in this mashed potato over here. Just one moment.
So 1 second. So could the Rav make a quick sikkum on the applesauce before you go to the mashed potatoes?
So on the applesauce, if it's the regular store-bought applesauce, which is all mushed up legamre, and you don't see any mamoshes kayim, there's no question that you make a shackle. That's the minig Ashkenazim and even the Svardim. The only thing is if you have an apple in front of you, an applesauce. So here there's a chiddush from the Kaf HaChaim, which I think that everyone really should do. You'll make the bracha on the apple and pot of the sauce. Why? What are you gaining? Isn't that the whole question? That if you have the bracha on the sauce, we want to get out of that shaila, and we want to make everybody happy. So we want to make on that shahakal. Oh, but over here, no. There, the reason we were machmir is because there are shitas that hold that you're not yotzei with an eitz on the applesauce, and that would be now a shaila of a bracha levatala, because you made a boirei priya eitz and it was not hal. So then it's also nanamir lamazav bracha, and it's also a bracha levatala. Then they were scared, and the Ramah said, why not do something everybody's happy, make a shackle? But let's say I have a bracha which is clearly chal on an apple. I make a berry pre on an apple. So it's definitely chal. So then you definitely didn't over on bracha levatala. Elamai, the only thing you'll be over on is maybe on the applesauce. There's a sheet out there that we don't paskin like be'etzim. And according to that shita, you're eating applesauce without a bracha. Okay, that's not as chamer to shaila. So for that shaila, we'll be seimach on the ikar din of on the applesauce, and therefore the bracha I made on the apple will pata me for the sauce. Is that clear?
Well, yeah.
Good?
I think so.
Good. Okay. Now let's get to the cases. This is really the ikar, is to try now apply this lemaisa. That's really more the yisaitis, what we just spoke about. But this one was written on the back of my boarding pass. So let me just make sure that I can find it. Here it is. I'm in it. Yeah, here it is. Okay. Okay. Legabe the potato. So now it's very interesting. When it comes to a potato, it would seem that there's a big shaila. The mashed potato in general, no. So that McClaren, I mean, that's definitely is the tzur kaim, is it not kaim, is really one shaila. I'll read you over here. Dorletzian, Hitaka says, I'll rest like the porch adama. A regular, a pureed regular mashed potatoes. He says they make a shahakal. It would make sense. He's going with the fact that it's clearly that if you take a Martian and show him a potato and you show him a mashed potato, he's not going to be able to figure this one out. And therefore, even the Svardim say shahakal. The only thing is that you see in the Sefer, the same bracha, he brings down from Rav Shlomo Zalman, in Perichav Beis, in Rav Elyashiv, in Rechaim Pinchas. It's all about Peh, but he seems to have asked them, and they seem to say that you're making it always a Bari Priyadama. You look in the Shevet Levi, he's brought in, he has a Koibitz base Levi in Chelik Yudalid in the 48th page. He says, well, it depends. If it's mashed up legamra, and you can't tell, it's shakal. If it's a little bit and you could tell bits, it would be an Adama. So what's Lamais on this Shaila? So again, if it's mashed up legamre, it would seem to be that it would be a shackle. Only thing you could clear is maybe there's a whole other sugya over here of not the adaita dahachi, that if something is commonly used for potatoes are made very much to be mashed potatoes, so then maybe you could say a svar over here that it's always going to be, like a sugya of a not adaita dahachi. I was thinking maybe that's one svara, or maybe you could say that the Grace Gedolim over here held that mamashis is called kayim. Because since this is what happens when you cook it in a normal way, is it gets mushy right away. So maybe that is considered the mamashis is kayim. And I do think that the minig over here is taka on a potato to make on a regular mashed potato. I didn't get yet to the powdered potatoes and things like that, the reconstituted potatoes. I would think that the minig is to make an adama. And I think that you could be saimach on the minig simply because we saw that the ikar shita anyways is on mashed potatoes, any of these things, even if it would be nimoich legamre to make an adama. I myself would try to patter it on maybe a cornflake.
Why is mashed potatoes different than applesauce?
The difference is that mashed potatoes is such a commonly usage of the potato, number one. And number two, so you might have this far of not the diet achi. And number two, it could be that mashed potatoes, there's nobody who's making it into a liquid. You don't want to drink mashed potatoes. So maybe that's the level of mamash is still kayim. And that I can imagine is something which is debatable. But since the ikar psak anyways is that we pask in a dhamma, even if it would be nimar legamre, so if I say right, I don't know if you have to miyos toiv. Maybe only have to miyos toiv when it's clear. But in this case, the ikar psak al bema says we do make adama. So I would imagine on mashed potatoes, the best thing to do is probably to take an adama, clear adama, like a popcorn or something like that, and make an adama and pater. But if not, I would make on regular mashed potatoes, not the reconstituted ones. On that, clearly, the you can make on that an adama. Is that clear?
It's clear the psak. It's not 100% clear why the difference between
it's a bar de. First of all, we pass in meikar adin about 3 tzirufim. First of all, we pass in meikar adin that on nimuch legamre, emes and nimuch legamre to dam. Number two is I don't think this is nimuch legamre because it's something that when you cook mashed potatoes, there's nobody getting to the point of liquid for sure not, and you're trying to get it beforehand that it should be zis and geshmak. So there's chunks and there's this, and maybe that is what a potato looks like. It's not like an apple. An apple is something you have to mamish. It's way beyond, and it's not a daita dahachi. So therefore, when you put that together with the fact that the ikar psak halacha is you make on an adama, and it's a bit of a suffix if you're supposed to be making an adama or shakal, so then it would seem that you could be able to be makel. Yeah, obviously, it's better if you have little bits. Obviously, it's better if you pater. But if he doesn't, then that's all he has in front of him. L'chayra, in this case, that it's not a clear ein mamachas kayim, I would say you should make on an adama. L'chayra.
So
only if you had something which was clear.
About the dehydration issue.
Sorry?
Dehydration. Can we ask you about the dehydration on the potatoes now?
That's what I'm getting to now. Right. So on the dehydrated potatoes, so there's a tshuva from the Moshe. Right. And the truth is that I'll read you. The Moshe is I saw brought down in a sefer called the Shira Shleima. It's a kuntres on Tefillah the Moshe. This I saw today. When I came home, on page 27, he brings down Omar Marani. He asked Rav Moshe, and Rav Moshe said on instant potatoes, and we'll see in a minute about Pringles, but he seems to say that the bracha is a bari pri adama. There's some type of a shmua that the bracha is adama. That's very interesting. Rebelsky, in the Shulchan HaLevi, in page 37, he brings from Rav Moshe that for many years, Rav Moshe said it's shahakal. That on these instant potatoes, Rav Moshe seemed to, he told him that he, and then it seems that Rav Moshe changed his psak.
What is, could the Rav describe to us what is instant potatoes exactly?
Instant potatoes are, they take the potato and they basically cook it, and then they pulverize it and make it into a powder, and then they reconstitute it. You put in boiling hot water and it reconstitutes and makes into mashed potatoes. Al derech, the shaila of the concentrate. Like Rabbi Snyder was asking before I came on. Didn't think I was listening. That you basically are taking it and giving it back the liquid. Some, what they do is they pulverize it. Some, what they do is they just basically take out all of the kishkas with heat, and then it just basically turns into a powder. But whatever it is, it's reconstituted. So now at that point, when it was a powder, the chayah was pulverized. That for sure, at that point, when they took out all the juice and all this, it was a powder pasha. When you get it in the bag, it's a powder. That for sure is ema mashis. If somebody would eat it then, it's probably also only edible b'shatz tzchak, so it's probably a shackle for sure. Now, when I put it back together, so madinai, kipshutai, it should be a shackle because it was a shackle, and who cares that you're reconstituting? Why should chayzer v'neir play a role in this sugya? This is not your idea. Why should it play a role? It's interesting that this is the HBrachos in the 251st page. He talks about this in the same bracha, the Perikah base. He brings again the great Gedolim, Rav Shlomo Zalman, Rav Elyashiv, Rav Chaim Pinchas. They all seem to say that if it was instant potatoes, that you do make on it a bari priyadama. They do seem to say that it's a bari priyadama. I guess the svara is that it goes with the reconstituting shaila, and we're just basically putting it back to what it was. And therefore, we don't look at the mid-stage. It's a chiddush. You certainly could have heard not like that. The problem over here, which bothers me, is every single thing I'm saying is no one wrote a tshuva about. It's all hearsay, and it's chedushim gedolim. It's chedushim, certainly chedushim gedolim, and I don't know. I guess you can feel good because the Ramah holds the Shita is even on these things you make on them a bari priyadama. But I must tell you, of all things, this is definitely quite scary. And Rebelsky said that Ramah always said it was a shackle, and then he changed his mind and he said it's adama. And they say that the reason he writes there Ramah changed his mind is because he saw that today instant potatoes is so common. Maybe it's not that daiti. I find that to be tamua. It's pelagic to say that most potatoes in the world are grown for instant potatoes. It's certainly not the Messias. So I don't know, and it's all hearsay. And therefore, I definitely find this to be quite difficult that somebody would make on it a shackle. The only thing I did find in print is the Eshel Avram, the Buchacha, Madura, Tinyana, and Siv Zayin by us. He says, Loy matzanu rak bepira lechem. We only find by bread that if you crumpled it up and then stuck it back together, that al yedei putting it back together, it might get the same bread again. But it's only by bread that we found out that they pira anything else. He says when you put it back together, it's a shackle gamim achakak. Even if afterward you stick it together, val yedei zeh gets a toyer of the pre, it would still be shackle. I think from the Eshel Avram, it sounds like that if you put things back together again, then it retains the shame of a shackle. So I'm not.
The Olam here seems to think that stuff you buy in a restaurant, when you order mashed potatoes in a restaurant, they're serving you reconstituted, it's for sure. It's not made in the kitchen, the smash a potato in the kitchen, especially
So
in
it depends where you guys are eating. In Eretz Yisrael,
right.
You're 100% right. In America, in the fancy restaurants where you guys are eating, Rabbi Yisai, my findings have found that it's not the same texture and it's not the same potatoes, and therefore it's not the Metzias. I was talking to someone Taka today, and he told me there's a Lakewood restaurant, and he would never serve potatoes from powder. I don't want to, get into Lakewood politics, but apparently it's not the same. So I don't know.
Well, in a restaurant, you have a chicken and you have a potato. What bracha do you make?
You have to ask the restaurant if it's regular mashed potatoes, touch it by me in adama, meaning if it's reconstituted, so then I would say it's a suffix, and I would say you should try to pater it. I would say you should pater. If you cannot pater it, I would do like the Eshel Avram, like the Buchacha, and do shahakol, because Buchacha seems to see explicitly. No one else is in print. It's all b'shem, and Ramesh changes his mind. We know for sure at one point Ramesh held it to shahakol, and then maybe changed his mind. And I definitely don't. I definitely think that a person should make an a shahakol. Memela brings us to the big shaila
that we have to ask the kitchen whether they're making it out of a whole potato or reconstituted potato.
Absolutely.
They're going to tell you, and they're going to, I don't know.
For sure. Why not? Go in there. You tell them, are the potatoes mashed potatoes? Are they made from reconstituted or not?
Potatoes they're made from?
I'm sorry?
What? every restaurant has a mashgiach immediately available to talk to? Stop, lav dafka. You
That's
go to a
Mishkiach. You go in and
you go
ask
to
the
a
Chinese fellow. Wang, are these
not so
potatoes?
Matthias. Not so
Right?
Matthias. A lot of stores they'll end up with goyim only there.
No
Mashgiach not
problem.
taking time.
Me habla español. ¿Cómo se llama usted? Me llamo Roberto. I want to know, by that point, he knows English. I want to know, how do you make the potatoes? Are they made from, he loves to talk. He wants to talk. Everyone likes to talk about their job. I talk about my job all day long.
It's zicher shahako, and
Sorry?
if it's made from a regular potato, it's a machlokes. That's the
Correct.
fact.
But when it's a regular potato, so now I would think that you could be saying yes to make an adama, but now you go all the way to the reconstituted, and now you're adding another factor, and that factor to me seems to be a big chiddush, a big pella. And Ramosha, we know at one point in his life for sure said that you make on it a shahakol. So I would definitely imagine we have no explicit tshuva about this, and therefore I would imagine that you make on it a shahakol, which brings us to the great shaila of Pringles. Now, the Pringle shaila is a totally different shaila than regular potato chips. On regular potato chips, there the mamashas is kayim. You sliced up a thin slice, and then you baked it, and therefore fried it, and therefore the bracha is a dhamma, because it's mamashas kayim. A Pringle seems to be the same story as the reconstituted potatoes. They take a potato, they cook it, they then pulverize it, as we say. I actually might have the process written down here. Just one second. They reconstitute it, and then they put it back together in the shape that they want. And l'chayra, at first glance, it would be somewhat totally in the reconstituted shaila, but mitzad sheni, it's going to be l'chayra even more pasha. It should be a shahakol. Why? Because l'chayra, they reconstitute it, and they don't even reconstitute it back to the texture and the nature of what was. Bishlama, there was a tzad by the reconstituted potatoes that you made it back into mush. So therefore, we could dal mikan the mid process over here, and we went back to what was a bit of a chiddush. But by Pringles, they don't even have that. At one point, it was a shackle for sure. It was the powder. Then afterward, when you put it back together again, you didn't even put it back together. You didn't reconstitute it in that fashion. So there's no tzad in the world that a Pringle should be a shackle. An adama, excuse me. It's pashut, it should be a shackle, and no tzad. No tzad. And Rabbi say,
what are the two stuff? It should be a shackle because it was lost. It was a liquid.
It's pashut, it should be a shackle. It's almost no tzad. It used to be a powder, and in the form of powder, it was a shackle. Now you put it back together again, and what? And you put it back together again, and what? You put it back together again, not in the form of potato. So what's a tzad bichlal? You didn't put it back into the form of a mash. Bishlama, by the case of reconstituted. So we could say you went back to that shlav. So therefore, we could be mevatel the shlav of powder. Here, it was a powder, which was vada shakal. And then you turned it into what? You turned it into something that looks like a potato chip? No, it doesn't. It looks like a Pringle. It looks like a nothing. So what's a tabichlal? And we said it's not totally in what it looks like also. It's totally is mamashas kayim. Where's the mamashas kayim over here? It doesn't have the mamashas of a potato. So there's no tzad in planet Earth that a Pringle should be a shak, an adama. Before I continue, is that pashit?
Yeah, that's except
pashit. But the Velt makes a dama, right?
As far as bring a dama from some
zaman. The Velt makes a dama. The Velt makes a dama. There's a sefer, like I mentioned before, the same bracha, and over there he seems to say, the Shlomo Zalman says on a Pringle, you make an adama. So Shlomo Zalman says you make an adama. So now I'm going to show you that's he says on a Pringle, you make an adama. But now I'm going to show you that l'chayr it's impossible. And therefore, Kanir the Metzias wasn't told to Rav Moshe, to Rav Shlomo Zalman. Everybody say, I'm going to tell you a very interesting court case that Pringles had in England. And that's where I just was. And this is where this information came from. Pringles, apparently, when it comes to food products in general are there's much more liberal laws about paying taxes. However, that's only by food. People need food. But potato chips, which aren't healthy, et cetera, and things like that, so they do have to pay on snacks, they have to pay taxes. Pringles company was sued, and the amount was, hold your breath, the amount was over 160 million pounds. They were sued for not, and I say how much money, you guys are feeding them. They were sued for 160 million pounds that they didn't pay taxes. What was their claim? Their claim is, we're not a potato chip, we're a Pringle. A Pringle is something else. Do you know what a Pringle is, Rabbi Isai? You think it's just a reconstituted potato. It's not at all. It's 40% potato flour or whatever, and 60% other stuff. And you put all that together, that other stuff, the bracha of that other stuff, Rabbi Isai, spices and seasonings and wheat starch, which is a shahakel, and shahakel, it's 60% shahakel, 40% adama, quote unquote. Rabbi Isai, we've been lied to. A Pringle is not at all an adama, because when you reconstitute it, 60% of it is shahakels. So Mela, before we said there's no shaila because you're taking a powder and you're putting it back together into something else, not even to what it was. And even that I thought was a shakel. Now there's no shaila in the world. You're taking this powder and you're putting it back together and you're putting all this stuff together and making this new chefza called a Pringle. It's something totally different. And they went to court over this shaila, Rabbi Isai. Zalam de shaila. They claim we're not a potato chip b'klal. The other side, the government claimed, no, you are. All the other things are bottle to the Adama, trying to give the Adama taste and make it taste like a potato chip. You hear the lumdis? Gemara Shiloh, Lahavdil. And they tell you, no, we take all that 60%, and that's the ikr, and it creates this big chefza called Pringle. It's not a potato chip. They got to lost the case. But I don't know if that's Kavein Halacha. I agree with Mr. Pringle. I think they're right. In halacha, they're for sure right. 60% Adama, 60% shackle, 40% Adama. It was a flour, which at that point was clearly shackle, and now you put it back together into a shackle. It's a vadai shackle.
So basically, it's sidestepping the whole shaila.
I have no suffix that this Mitzias is not told or something.
You're sidestepping of making an ikr and tuffle and saying Rav is not a dama anyway, so how could it possibly be a dama?
Then I'm a manashach. There's no way that this psak, I know the Velt does make on it in a dama, now there's no way that psak could be. But now Baisai, now we're going to go to a much bigger problem. Memela, is a Pringle adama? It's not adama. Is it shahakel? I don't know. We have a new shaila now. What's the new shaila? Now we have a very big shaila. Is a Pringle kosher? Now we know that the OU holds it's kosher, but now it's done, a whole new shaila. Abaisai, is there a Jewish person turning on the oven in the Pringle company? Absolutely not. So how does the OU give on it a hechsher? So what? Years ago, the reason why the OU gave on it a hechsher was very simple. Well, not simple at all, but at least very clear reason. The Pringle, the way we described it years ago was, you took this potato, you broke it down, you put it back together again. How'd you put it back together again? So the first shlav, they baked the potato. Hey, wait, stop the clock. If you bake a potato, that's bishalakum. Ani mamin b'muna shlema, that goyim are not allowed to cook things that are oil shulch malachim. Charles at the coronation, there were potatoes on the table. So does this oil shulch malachim? No shot. And we don't even need that table. But okay. So now, and that's the psak. Today in Klal Yisrael, the psak is potatoes are definitely all shulchan malachim. A guy cooks it, it's definitely not kosher. Okay, so they cooked the potato. A guy cooked the potato. You're gonna say, yeah, but you didn't cook the potato in the way that it could be all shulchan malachim. Tatala, neither is your schnitzel, neither is your meat. So that's glory nil with bishul akum. That a potato is bishul akum, and therefore the potato is treif. What's the difference between that and the regular potato chip shaila? The regular potato chip shaila, which we know is a big machlekes if you need bishul yisrael or not, that's because they're taking in the raw form and they're cooking it into a way which has no shaykhis to a potato. That would be oila shulchan malachim. So there's a machlekes. Some say no, but the same potato, and some say no, this is a chip. It's a different chefza. Okay, our case is no shaykhis. They cooked the potato. At that point, the potato stopped the clock. Was a regular potato, regular mashed potato, which is oil shulchan malachim. Now they took it, they pulverized it. So now starts a very big shayla. When they pulverized the potato, and now it's a powder, at that point, maybe this thing is nothing. Because at this point, it's not edible, kimat. Now they reconstitute it with, they have to recook it. They have to reconstitute it. So maybe, at the point of when it was cooked, you're right, treif. But now they made a new panim. This panim is totally not edible. So now this is for sure not oil shulchan malachim. Now at the point when they reconstituted it, even though a guy is doing it, but he's taking something and putting it to the form of where it's not oil shulchan malachim. So the question is, are we allowed to stop the? Are we allowed to? Do we stop the clock? If we stop the clock, there was one point there was chal treif, or maybe not. Maybe we could say there's a panim chadashis balakan. This thing that was treif is gone, and it became a not oil shulchan malachim. It became, and then when you put it back together again, it's still not oil shulchan malachim. That Rabbi say apparently, and that's a big shaila in HILCHOS b'shalakum. Many years ago, in order to put the Pringle back together, you had to do a cooking process to put it back together. You had to go and put boiling hot water in it to get it back together. If that's the case, then in order to put it back together, you have to do a cooking process. So then I could hear that original cooking process is gone, and the new cooking process is to a process which will make it not oila shulchan malachim, and therefore there's a tzad to say it's kosher. But mashenkin today, it's not how they make Pringles. They take the potato, they cook the potato, they make it into a powder, and then they just pour water on it, and then they make it into what they want. But it doesn't have to undergo a bishul process. If it doesn't have to, just regular water. If they don't have to go and undergo a bishul process, it's impossible to not reckon with the first stage. There was a cooked potato, and that's what gave me the Pringle that I have now. So it's like taking a piece of meat and pulverizing it, and then pouring water into it and turning it back into a piece of meat. Bishlam, if I have to go and cook it or something, then I hear. So by say, this, then Pringle's not Adama, it's not Jahakol, it's not kosher. I know you. So I was told after I asked these questions that the OU has a grandfather clause, and if something was kosher, then it remains kosher, kolzman, that we have something to rely on. So this isn't what they rely on. They rely on the svaras of factories, and maybe there's no bishul akim in a factory, which is something that if you're going to go with that svar, everything in bishul akim is mutter, even though you does not go with that. But they make it as a tziruf many times. So in this case, my understanding was that the tziruf here is it was kosher, and there is a svar out there, factories. Now, nobody relies on the svar of factories, my understanding is, because then came out everything today, you wouldn't need anything, bishul yisrael, any of the cans, anything else. Another svar they go with is that the way they make this potato to cook it is that they steam it. And steaming is a big shaila. If that's in bishul akum, again, on that shaila, we're machmir in the halachas of bishul akum. It's not like the smoking shaila, it's a steaming shaila. On that shaila, we are machmir. So therefore, what though you is saimich on, I understand. Should a person be saimich on this? I certainly would not. So, is it adama? Is it chagol? I'm not sure if it's kosher. Any questions before I continue? That's what's called a curveball.
So let's make a sikum of the issue regarding bishul akum, so we make sure we didn't lose everybody.
Sorry.
The Rav can make a sikum here of was yaitz and the Pringles and the bishul akum, so to make sure we
Sure.
didn't lose it.
They're the bishul akum shaila. Now that you see that the metzias is that they're taking something and cooking it and making it a total product. If they're making it into a total product, excuse me, that product is already got treif mitzad hilchos bishul akum. It was a potato. So bishlama, if after they made the potato and they pulverize it and then they have to cook it again to get their product, so then I could say I can misyaches to the new cooking shlav. But if they don't even have to cook it, they just pour boiling hot cold water in it. So then how could I not be misyaches to the original stage when they cooked it? And at that point, it was treif. So it does not matter, as I'm being asked, if Pringles, of course, they're not served on shulchan malachim, but it's like taking a piece of meat and then taking the meat and making it into meat dust. And let's say meat dust becomes a nice dessert. Of course, it's treif because it was chal already a shame of meat. All right? There's no question in the world. You can't could you take a potato by side, a guy will cook it and then make it into powder and eat it? Of course not. It's treif. There's no question. No one argues on that. Even though you doesn't argue on that. So here you're doing that. You powder, you made it, and then you pour cold water into it. So of course it's treif already. Nothing changed. Elamai, since they once gave an extra, and that's a klal in a lot of institutions. So now they want to be saimich on factories and whatever. That's not something they're saimich on in any of their other situations. So therefore, this is, I find quite difficult to eat Pringles in general if somebody's going to ask me. But Legabe, if somebody does eat Pringles, so then clearly he would not make an Adama, he would clearly make a Shahakal. Legabe, one last Shaila, the Shaila of potato kogol. So it would seem that potato kogol should be tali if you have the bits and the mamoshes is kayim. Mashain gain. If you don't have the bits and it's pulverized, they mamish make it into a they blender and they make it into a liquid. So then that should be a shahakal. And that is really what the psak halacha should be on potato kugel. I saw one sefer that wants to make a tzushtel, and he wants to say that there's a very geschmack question and a stira to our sugya. Our sugya seems to say that when you mash something up, so then it loses the bracha. At least lechatchila. Excuse me. I'm saying it wrong. Our sugya said that lefi the Shulchan Aruch, if you mash up something, it retains the bracha, the Shulchan Aruch. So the Mogen Avraham asked the question in Reish Ches, that in Reish Ches it talks about if you have pas doichin and oiris, if you have like a rice cake that was made into a flour and a powder, or millet and these things, so then the halacha is that you make it into a bread, you make a rice bread with flour and everything. So now the bracha is shahakal. So the Mogen Avraham asked the question, stira, the Shulchan Aruch, when it came to our simin in Reish Ches, very geschmack kasha. By us, he says that if you pulverize it, it's still a dama. Why over there by pas doichin you pulverized it, and over there it should be a dama. It's not. You make a shackle. Rice bread is shackle if it's made of a flour. So he has the stira, and he says a big side. He says over there it's mamish panim chadoshes balakan. There's a level he brings Rabbeinu Yaina. There's a level where everyone agrees. Panim chadoshes balakan. Mashen came by not panim chadoshes balakan. What does he mean? He seems to be saying that if you take something and you make it mamish into a bread, it's like a whole different type of thing. No one looks at it anymore as rice. Maybe perhaps cornbread, very good. That'll be enough kamina also. Perhaps cornbread. So he brings over there. Let me just quote it. Excuse me. He brings Rabbeinu Yaina. Yeah, the Mogen Avraham. I didn't write down where it was. I did. Reish Ches, Siv Ches, and the Mogen Avraham. And he brings the Rabbeinu Yaina that it's considered mamish a panim chadashis. It's lost the Torah's pre. Bread is not a pre. You can't say bread is a pre. Bread is not a pre. Right? With this Rabbi Isai, someone to say that that's maybe the answer to the chocolate shaila. Why is it that in chocolate you don't make a bread pre-8? So there's some that want to say, because chocolate, it's a whole different metzias over here. You have the bean and the chocolate, it's a whole different metzias. And that's maybe the eitzah. If that's the case, Rabbi Isai, I saw one sefer, he wants to say that potato kugel is also a totally different chefza. I don't hear that at all. Additionally, you have bread. So bread, I hear it. It's a bread, rice bread. It's rice bread. It's cornbread. It's something else. It's a whole different. It's a bread. It's a bread. The nevada. It's not a pre anymore. It's a bread. It's not a rice. It's a bread. So that here is a shahakal. The mashain kain, a potato kugel. Why is it potato and potato kugel? It's a whole different pre. Why, lama? I don't hear that. Chocolate, maybe you could hear that. Chocolate taka, you could hear that. But chocolate has other shilas about not that the hachi, etc.
On a standard commercial potato kugel.
So standard commercial potato kugel, you can't ask that question. In Eretz Yisrael, you see the bits, and therefore it's still a dama. But in America, I don't think you see them.
In America, in a kiddush kugel, you see the potatoes.
I think I don't know in America. What is it?
I'm asking my olim here. Do they use? Everybody wake up here. Do we see the potatoes? Yes or no?
Imagine them sometimes.
You imagining them doesn't help in the HILCHOS. You have to.
Sorry?
The Rabbi Black says he imagines the potatoes. You got to feel them or see them. Or
if you have the mamashis kaim, you have the mamashis kaim. So that. Yes, so Rabbi Elephant. That's exactly what I said. Pringles is 40%. Sorry.
Kugel. So potato kugel is mamashis kaim and it's an adama. Is that what the Rab's saying?
Yes.
No matter how creamy, no matter how, even made in a blender, no matter how creamy.
No, if it's in a blender, and that means it was liquefied mamish, it became mamish a juice. Depends how you make it.
Potato kugel. I don't know.
Sorry?
When my wife makes a big amount of potato kugel, she puts it in the blender.
Wait, but when she puts it in the blender, it comes out like a
And it
liquid.
comes out
mush?
liquidy, and then it has to bake for 3 hours. You make potatoes.
Oh, and then you don't have any bits. You don't see bits. Then it's a charcoal.
I don't know. What do I say? I don't know. I feel it's potato kugel. You know.
No, that's a charcoal. Then that's a charcoal for sure.
And what if you don't know what's together? You don't know.
If you
the
don't
full
know, meaning if you don't know because you can't tell, and it's like you're not sure if you're seeing bits or not. So then you have the svara that I mentioned before that in a suffix you might be able to make an adama anyways, because since the ikar psak of the Ramah is adama, so then that's nishkafelach. I got it. The ones in Eretz Yisrael you always see bits. I don't know in America, latkes for sure you always see bits.
And if they put it through a grinder or into a food blender, they put it through a grinder.
Absolutely. Yeah,
gonna
if you
see
put it into a
bits.
blender, you probably won't see bits. That's what I imagine.
They
Correct.
blend it up well, yes.
Okay,
pretty
with that,
sure-
Tommy
I'm
Nishlam, great
99%
face, he's
sure all commercial. I'm very sure, and now we can start asking them. But all commercial kugel is made by a blender. It's not possible otherwise. No one is sitting there right.
In Eretz Yisrael, it's bevadai not the case.
Not true, they grind in a big institutional grinder.
Of course, they put it
in a
into a
grinder.
blender. How else? They can't make large amounts of kugel on Thursday night by hand. They have to put it into a blender.
Not by hand, there's something called a commercial grinder. You put the potatoes into the grinder and you push them through a thing that has holes in it.
I think people like the bits. I can't imagine that.
Some of them will might, but most of them have
If
some
you're
big.
saying that the
some big-
minig oilam is to make adama, maybe it came from the fact that most of in the olden days, most of them were not put in blenders, so they had bits. So therefore, everyone made adama on a potato kugel, and the hanhaga just stuck. But you know, I certainly check and look if I see bits. If I see bits, I make adama. If I don't see bits, I try to patter it. Take a peanut.
And is there no Moshe is eating for shmua on potato kugel?
Ramesha, hold on. No, I don't have any Ramesha. I have a Shevet Levi that makes that chilik that we mentioned. Chilik good to mem vav. That if it has bits or it doesn't have bits.
Printed from Rav David Feinstein, the potato kugel is a shackle.
David Feinstein. Let's see what I have here. Where in the Tibarta Bam?
I need to know what to make, what bracha to make it my Kiddush and Shabbos. A dama or a shackle? Which one? I'm asking the Rav.
If you see the bits, you make a dama. If you don't see the bits, you patter it. You have to walk around with a cornflake in your pocket, Rabbi Say. The Kellogg's cornflakes.
Cornflakes is a bigger problem than potato kugel, right?
No, not the Kellogg's one. Those are Vadai Adama because the Mamashis is Kain.
Oh, right. Okay. Let's see. What about guacamole?
So guacamole, maybe you could hear as far as Vadaita Dahachi. By guacamole, I think that's like 50% of the usage, if I'm not mistaken. But it's not so practical because nobody eats guacamole by itself anyways, right? It's usually a spread, which usually you have ikar v'tafel as far as acid is.
Yeah, okay. So you put it on a cracker, you're saying.
Yeah.
But who said
either on a cracker or on a slice of bread?
Who said the crackers? We have to get to ikar and tuffle. Who says the crackers the ikar? Maybe the guacamole is ikar. You put on the herring. You put on 2 million.
I think herring's like a chefza. Here it's more like a schmear, no?
So schmear takes something out of being a possibility of an ikar. Okay,
Yeah,
I don't want to.
dark. Yeah.
The bracha. So Lamaisa potato kugel, the minig elam still kayam. The elam should make an adama. That's the bottom line.
No. If it has bits, it's a dumb. If it doesn't have bits, you should pack it.
Okay, but I know. But I'm asking the elam here. Is it clear that you have bits in the potato kugel? L'chayra, even if it's blended. At home.
That could be.
How much is the blend?
Okay, no, it's not so how much, but no. Okay, Yeshakayach. So Rabbi Sai, next week, HaRav. So we should do the mission on Paris and Berachal Paris, correct? And
Well, what's next week? I don't know this. What is this?
What?
What's next week?
Paris and HaRav. So
Which Mishnah?
The process we made it straight.
well, we're talking about the Mishnah on Mem.
Ah, Reish Vav, we're going to Reish Vav.
I get L'chaira, no? We're skipping, we're skipping Lamatesh, we're skipping, Bruce, Shleim and all that. So on Amud Aleph, Amud Aleph, that's that's the next bracha. That's the next big sugya, right?
No, but there's two sugyas here. I don't know which one you're going to. Are you going to Reish Vav or are you going to Reish Gimel? Reish Gimel is the sugya of berries and what's considered a pre-adama, what's considered a pre-eitz, berries and cherries and strawberries and all that. That's Reish
Right.
Gimel. It's a very geshmaka sugya.
Reish
That's
Gimel.
raspberries and everything. But the first line of the Mishnah is Reish Vav. If you make a bracha on one thing, on a very pre-eitz, I think
Right,
I think you mean Reish Gimel.
Yeah, Reish Gimel. Yes, Reish Gimel.
Because I'm assuming Reish Gimel unless I hear otherwise.
Reish Gimel. Reish Gimel. Reish Gimel.
Reish Gimel.
Okay. Yeshakayach.
Okay. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you very much.